Welcome to Season 3, Episode 7 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to share some thoughts on letting go of expectations around testing so that it feels less stressful. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript, links to recommended resources, and share your thoughts on the show. So this week, I'm addressing a question that was submitted by a podcast listener named Anna. This is what she writes. Hi, Angela. In your book, Awakened, you mention how often our expectations steal the joy from teaching. Thoughts like they're supposed to do or know that already can keep us stuck. This was a life-changing realization for me and really eye-opening. However, I'm still having a hard time letting go of my expectations when it comes to testing. I mean, you teach students, you prepare them for tests and exams. Of course, you have some expectations around their performance and begin to feel frustrated when they keep making the same mistakes over and over again. You may start questioning the purpose or the quality of your work, even though testing is not the end-all be-all, but still, it's an indicator of students' progress, and a teacher is there to help them improve their test results. So my question is, how can I let go of expectations around testing and results? Now, I'm not going to lie, this was truly one of the hardest things for me to deal with as a teacher, and I never quite did get a handle on it. My husband, who was my fiance back in my final years in the classroom, used to just dread the day that those scores came back because he knew I would be an emotional wreck. I think I cried every year when I got my third grader standardized test results back because in Florida, whoever didn't pass was going to be automatically retained. And that was a tremendous burden for any teacher to bear, to know that children were going to have to spend an extra year of their lives in the K-12 school system, taking more multiple choice tests and having the love of learning just wrung right out of them, in part because of things that I did or didn't do as a teacher. This guilt of students not passing the test, it's one of the greatest stressors that teachers feel. Whether they're talking about it publicly or not, it's very, very real. So I can't give you any magic solutions that will remove that burden of responsibility altogether and somehow make it not sting when your students fail assessments. I mean, not to be overly dramatic here, but it's kind of like promising that I can make it not hurt when someone that you love is seriously injured. There's going to be emotional trauma and guilt and desperation. The only thing that I can offer you is some mindset shifts that can help lessen the burden a little bit. Now, let me elaborate a little bit on what Anna is referencing from my book, Awakened, Change Your Mindset to Transform Your Teaching. So in the book, I wrote about how the goal is to let go of unrealistic expectations and a rigid determination that we just have to have a certain outcome. That does not mean that we don't have any expectations at all for students. Having expectations is a good thing, like she mentioned. We train kids to follow rules and procedures and expect them to behave properly. We teach them and we expect them to learn something. Those are reasonable norms. The only time our expectations create a problem is when we refuse to accept any other outcome. We have to be open to every possibility. Expect students to meet learning goals, but when they don't, accept it and deal with it. Don't cling to your expectations and repeat them over and over in your mind. They should be working harder. They have to master this right now, this very week. They're supposed to care about their education and pay attention. They're supposed to be making progress at a faster rate. Holding on to those expectations, these preconceived notions of how things, quote unquote, should be and how students are supposed to score on tests, holding on to that creates fearfulness. It causes you to live in a constant state of low-grade anxiety as you worry about whether all these expectations will be met. Thinking so much about what you want to happen causes you to identify too closely with the anticipated outcome. You can't let go of it because it's a part of you. Any other outcome becomes an attack on your beliefs about how students should learn. It becomes an attack on who you are as a teacher. And the ultimate result is that you lose the ability to accept any reality except for the actualization of what you expected. Rather than a failed test being a disappointing setback, it becomes a tragedy that puts you in a terrible mood for the rest of the day or even the week. So it's important to examine your expectations and determine whether they serve you or weigh you down. If a particular expectation is only creating frustration and bitterness, you cannot hold on to it. Let go of your personal demands on the moment. Look forward to the future with optimism, but avoid having any specific expectations of other people, including your students. When you get up in the morning, tell yourself that you're going to have a good day. You're going to choose to be positive and productive and keep doing your best regardless of what effort your students put in, regardless of how well they master learning goals. Focus your anticipation on the things that are completely within your control, such as your attitude and your behavior. Don't run down a list of outcomes that you expect from students and their performance and their choices. And then, when you have a few kids who don't pass a benchmark test, dismiss those negative thoughts that come in. Dismiss thoughts like, here we go again. This test is impossible. It's way too hard. The kids are so far behind. They're never going to catch up. The instant you realize that things are not happening according to your expectations, resist the urge to compare reality to your expectations. Tell yourself, this isn't the outcome I expected, but it's all right. I'm not going to waste time thinking about what I wanted to happen. Instead, I'm going to focus on moving forward. You want to reframe the situation so that you don't wallow in the setback. Get yourself right back on track mentally. This was one test. I'm going to stay calm. I'm not going to let students' scores determine my attitude. I'm not going to allow a few kids who didn't pass a test to upset me so much that I don't have the patience and energy to keep giving my all with this class. This day is not ruined. Life is not over. I'm moving on to the next learning task, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. You see, this is ultimately about replacing our unrealistic expectations with more accurate ones. The goal is to think rationally. Rational thoughts line up with what you experience in the world. Irrational thoughts are based on what you believe the world should be like. And frustration occurs when you attempt to make reality conform to your beliefs about it. It's impossible to make everything and everyone conform to your standards. And when you attempt to do so, it just invites more negative emotions. It's far easier to change your standards than to change the way that everyone around you meets them. We know that our school systems are placing irrational, unrealistic demands on teachers and kids. It is not rational to expect 100% of students to pass every single exam that we give them. It's not happening, ever, anywhere on the planet. They make that the goal, and they put pressure on you and the kids to make it happen because it sounds terrible to say, let's just try to get 75% of the kids reading at, let's say, no more than a year or two below grade level. In some communities, even that would be a stretch. Districts don't want to look like they have low expectations for students. They have to set the bar high. But you can't internalize that expectation and allow your mood and your sense of accomplishment to ride on it. You can't. You have to define success and value and worth for yourself, regardless of how your students test. Go back to Season 1, Episode 13. It's called How to Be Unshakable in Your Enthusiasm for Teaching. In that episode, I talked about how to create your own vision for teaching. And I summarized the chapter about it in my book, Unshakable, 20 Ways to Enjoy Teaching Every Day, No Matter What. You have to focus on your vision. Don't miss this. Do not internalize these irrational, unrealistic expectations and assume that there is something wrong with you and your students if you're not meeting them. Let's get really big picture with this. Are you ready? Ask yourself these questions. Why do I assume that not getting all kids to master all standards at the same time means there's a problem with my students or with me? Who says that if a student can't master a skill by a certain month, that something is developmentally wrong or that I'm not doing my job well? What expert mandated that all children must identify 10-letter sounds by the 6th month of their 5th year of life, or must master place value to the 1 millions by age 10? Where did that come from? If schools didn't group students by age, would I worry so much about learning disabilities and students falling behind? What does it even mean to be behind? Is it possible that a child isn't delayed or behind or below grade level, and maybe the truth is that they're just not mastering artificial benchmarks determined by this committee of people at this place in the world, at this point in history? Would this student have been labeled as not meeting expectations 20 years ago? Or even now in a different country? Would any of this have even been an issue if our school systems weren't designed the way they are? Think about these questions when you start getting really myopic and hyper-focused on a single test score. Get yourself back into big picture mode. And most importantly, ask yourself this: could it be possible for me to stop obsessing over these artificial benchmarks and support each student in growing and developing at his or her own individual pace? Now, I don't mean that you should do that in practice, that you would just throw out your grade level standards and let kids learn through play and their own interests and master developmental markers whenever they're ready. That's a lot like unschooling. Some people do teach that way, but it's not something that the average school teacher can just up and do in the classroom. I mean, do this mentally, to stop obsessing over artificial benchmarks and support each student in growing and developing at his or her own individual pace. I mean, in your mind, stop internalizing unrealistic standards and start looking at the big picture. Reframe the situation in a more rational, fully accurate, big picture way so that it feels less stressful. Reframe the thought that I must get all my kids to pass the standardized tests. I can't handle knowing that any of them failed. Reframe it with this perspective: I would like for all my kids to pass the standardized tests. That's my goal, and I keep working towards it every day. But I can't control the outcome. It would be disappointing if some of them didn't meet proficiency, but it doesn't mean that I'm a failure or that they didn't learn anything in my class. So keep holding those high expectations for students, but don't allow the expectations to define your self-worth as a teacher. Don't let them determine your mood. Don't let them steal your motivation. You are working miracles with those kids every single day in the classroom. And at least in the sense of your self-worth, that has to be enough. The motivational quote for the week ahead that I want to leave you with is this: if you find yourself constantly trying to prove your worth, you have already forgotten your value. Thanks for listening, and have a fantastic week. You can do this, and remember, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. Truth for Teachers is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. For more great podcast recommendations, go to edupodcastnetwork.com. That's edupodcastnetwork.com.